Welcome to a ride on the outside. MMA is full of people on the inside, but what about the ones that watch from beyond? Welcome to the MMA Outsiders with Tom Albano and Zain Bando on the Empty the Bench Podcast Network.
It's MMA Outsiders episode number 7. MMA Outsiders is back in your life on this Tuesday. Yes, Tuesday. That's Zain Bando. I'm Tom Albano. Thank you for tuning into another edition of MMA Outsider Action. Not all MMA talk this week, but we do have a lot of recapping we got to do in the boxing world, in the UFC world, and we do have to pay tribute to a legend who has actually confirmed it appears it will be the end of his MMA career. But again, that is Zain Bando. You can find his work at bjpen.com, and I am Tom Albano. You can find our work at Fansided MMA. Make sure to follow us across social media at MMA Outsiders ETB and at the ETB Network. You see our social media scrolling across the bottom right there. And above all else, make sure to hit that like button. Make sure to subscribe. Make sure to ring the bell when you subscribe so that way you can get notified about everything here on the Empty the Bench Network. Not just MMA Outsiders, but Game On and Empty the Bench for you sports fans. Living Life, Fruity Cereal, Beyond the Bench, and so much more. All right, let's get it started, Zain. So let's start with the biggest talk of the combat world. And it actually does not come in the octagon. It actually comes in the boxing world with quite possibly one of the worst fights of 2022. One of the biggest disappointments, not just in 2022, but just maybe in boxing overall, boxing history, at least modern boxing history. Canelo Alvarez and Gennadiy Golovkin, Triple G, had their trilogy fight on Saturday night. Obviously, we know the history of these two. The first fight in 2017 ending in a split draw after a highly controversial and flat out wrong 118-110 Canelo scorecard. And the other one in 2018, about almost exactly a year later, Canelo Alvarez winning the rematch in a very slim majority decision. So these two have their third meeting, obviously not as big as their previous two. We kind of alluded to that last week. Canelo having lost his light heavyweight championship fight back in May to Dmitry Bivol, and Gennadiy Golovkin really, against Sergey Milicheco in October 2019 when he was fighting for the IBF middleweight title. He kind of didn't have a strong finish, strong performance, and he's kind of looked old in the ring as of late, and he hasn't actually fought much since the start of the COVID pandemic, whereas Canelo has at least tried to keep himself busy as a defending champion. So we go into this fight thinking probably Canelo has this in the bag, that Canelo should win this, but thinking, is this going to bring the same intensity as their first two fights? And not only did it not, it failed. It failed hard.
Yeah, this fight, in all honesty, as you have alluded to, didn't live up to the hype that a lot of the general public thought it would. And just to quickly comment on the scorecard fiasco, I had the fight scored 10 rounds to 2. How did you have it scored?
I had 11-1.
Okay. Hey, which round did you give to Golovkin?
To Golovkin, I gave the 9th.
Okay. Yeah, I gave him 2. I'm pretty sure if it wasn't 9 and 10, it was 9 and 11. But I could see where 11-1 is justified, but nothing more for Golovkin than at the very minimum 10-2. It was not the fight that people were hoping for. Golovkin looked like a shell of his former self. Canelo pretty much did whatever he wanted to him. I was amazed that Canelo didn't stop him, just considering that Golovkin just was really shaky. His punches weren't getting off first. And it's not that he looked like he didn't prepare, because I'm sure he did, but it just looked like he didn't want to be in there. And that's the unfortunate thing, because considering how action-packed the first two fights were and how legendary they were, particularly the first one, which is the one that's marred in the most controversy out of the three. It didn't even come close to what either of those first two fights what they ended up becoming. And I honestly think it was a real downer, and I truly do feel for the people who purchased it, because I'm sure for the people who were casual boxing fans, they probably felt like they got ripped off, and rightfully so. And it's one of those things where it's just like, as Dana White always alludes to, there are some fights in the boxing arena where, it's getting better now, but he used to always say, every boxing event is like a going at a business sale. They try to make these fights way too late, and this is another one of those fights where I really do feel like this trilogy should have concluded probably 3 or so years ago, and that never happened. So, to look at it holistically, good for Canelo. He got the job done. He won by decision, but this was not a fight by any means where you walked out of that going, "Oh, that fight was super memorable," or anything of that sort. Canelo did what he needed to do. He won the fight. He got paid tons of money. So did Golovkin. But I really do think it just goes to show that, right now, like even in the sport of MMA, I feel like now more, we're seeing bigger fights happen when they're supposed to. And in boxing, we're still getting this delay where sometimes the best don't fight the best until it's either too late or there's less at stake. And I really feel like Golovkin Canelo was just one of those fights, and it showed in the result. And it's one of those where I feel like truly, in my opinion, Golovkin doesn't really have much more left to prove, and I think his performance showed that.
Yeah, I even said it on Twitter, referring to what you referred to before, that you never want to question a boxer's heart. You never want to question if they even want to be in there, especially when they're a star, the level of Gennadiy Golovkin. But that first half of the fight, he didn't look like he was doing anything.
No, he really.
I don't even think he got many punches, if any, off within the first 2 or 3 rounds. It was all Canelo, but Canelo, to your credit for what you said before, didn't really do much of anything either. It was just jab work.
Mm-hmm. But sometimes, though, when you are one of the best fighters in the world, you do what you need to do to win the fight, and that's literally what he did. And it may have been a boring fight, it may not have been the most entertaining fight, but at the end of the day, Canelo's fought the best in the world. He's paid his dues. He's fought in major championship fights. He's trying to, preserve his energy and preserve his overall career. And honestly, if you're on the side of Canelo, how could you blame him? He did exactly what he needed to do. He won the fight, and it's on to the next. But I just feel like this is a fight that was way too past its prime. I feel like we've kind of closed the chapter on this rivalry when this fight was announced. I was very surprised, as were you, and as were probably a lot of people. And it went exactly how I thought it was going to go. So,
well, that being said, as you mentioned, Triple G really looked like, as you said, a shell of his former self. Triple G just did not look like he wanted to be in there. And Triple G says it looks like he's going to go back down to 160 and continue to defend at middleweight, which I hope, for the love of God, if he really is going to do that, he looks a lot better than he did against Canelo. Now, to the point of Canelo, he did all that he needed to do, but he didn't look too spectacular either. Now, there have been some fights where like, I think of the Sergey Kovalev fight,
right.
where basically it looks like he's down, and then all of a sudden Canelo, it's like he's playing possum, and then in the championship rounds just completely overmatches, and he ends up defeating, in the example I mentioned, defeating Canelo, Sergey Kovalev for the WBO light heavyweight championship. Now, Canelo wants to try light heavyweight again. It seems like if Bivol wins his next title defense, he will want a rematch with Bivol, which, I mean, credit to Bivol for getting that payday, and credit to Canelo for getting another payday, but I just don't know how smart that is.
I would disagree with you on that. I would love to see this rematch. I think there's a lot of unfinished business there. I think Canelo knows that he made some mistakes. I think he knows that he got outboxed, and I think it would do big business if they had the second fight because the people who didn't know who Dimitri Bivol was before will know who he is now, and especially with this upcoming title defense in that November time frame, which is usually a really prime month for the sport of boxing. I think all eyes are going to be on him to see if he can win his next fight because I think that Canelo rematch is going to be big, and I think a lot of people will care. So I'm going to have to slightly disagree with you there. I actually do think it's great business for both sides.
I think the only concern you're going to have in terms of Canelo is where his platform and what it's going to be. Because if I'm going back to what you're talking about, a casual fan who purchased this pay per view and is feeling kind of ripped off, if you put Canelo versus Bivol 2 behind a DAZN pay per view paywall, I'm not sure how many people are going to be willing to go that extra mile after the kind of fight that we've had here. But I will also say that
Well, obviously, it depends on who the co-main event is, and if you can get another DAZN superstar, like an Amanda Serrano to be the co-main event, you have a little bit of a story there, in my opinions. Oh, it's how they're going to go about marketing it if that fight ever comes to fruition again.
fair,
Like who they have below it, they
fair,
would do,
and
they would have to do it the right way.
fair. And I don't mean to take anything away from the lighter weight class, but if it was something like this Canelo Triple G card where you just had, you know, a flyweight, super flyweight, or junior featherweight title defense, I don't know if that's going to do it.
I mean, to be fair though, the fight before the Canelo fight was pretty entertaining to
Oh,
say.
it was. It was. It,
Mm-hmm.
it just it just stinks that the fight that everyone wanted to see was such a downer, which actually also puts you mentioned how November is a big month for boxing. I think should put a lot of eyes on Terrence Crawford versus Earl Spence Jr. Should that fight finally be made official? Should that fight actually finally go down in a couple of months? That it would be representative of boxing actually doing boxing correctly in trying to get the best to fight the best for all of the gold. Now, that being said, that's for the pre fight stuff because you can't control what happens during the fight. And I'm not just referring to Canelo and Triple G's performances, I'm also referring to the scorecards that were. It's weird. The 118 to 110 Canelo from Miss Adelaide Bird from that first fight would have looked really great here in this trilogy bout.
Right. I would have been okay with that. I would have been okay with 117, 111, but 116, 114, 116, 112. You've got to be kidding me. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it stinks because we can't throw as much of an uproar because the right guy did win.
Right. Right. But also, in case you missed it, apparently, if Golovkin had won one more round, we would have been in a situation where they could have ruled it a draw. Well, thankfully that didn't happen. But
Oh, there would
we
have been a
were
massive
we,
uproar if
we were one round away from an absolute disaster, which thankfully didn't come true.
we were one round away from needing a fourth fight, sadly.
Mm-hmm. Which who knows who would have wanted to see a fourth fight considering how the third fight went.
I just I just feel for Golovkin because I think somebody on Twitter pointed out how you could have argued that Golovkin won either, if not both, of the first two fights, and now the fact that he has basically lost his trilogy is pretty damaging to him.
Mm-hmm. And damaging to his legacy and how he'll be remembered, which is
But
also another point too. Mm-hmm.
absolutely, but as far as the scorecards go, I still think Vegas should look into those. Like I said in the moment of mayhem, I think we should have an investigation into those. I think those three judges should be suspended. Do I think it's actually going to happen though? No,
No,
because I don't
absolutely.
think I don't think the Vegas Athletic Commission cares. And I think somebody out there kind of gets off on seeing these controversial scorecards and the big reactions that happen to them. There's no such thing as bad business.
Right, because as they say, if it makes dollars, it makes sense. So as long as everybody got paid, they don't care how bad the decision might be. But I guess that's another discussion for another day. Nonetheless, though, the right guy did win, and I'm sure a lot of people went home from Vegas probably richer than when they came into town. Because I'm sure, well, I saw one of the most popular bets going into that fight was Canelo by decision, and he did in fact win by decision. I actually did call it on Twitter that he was going to win by decision. So I
I
guess
called it here on Twitter. I called it here on the show.
yeah, you sure did. So I guess we all have to give ourselves a pat on the back. But yeah, the right guy won. The scorecards were kind of horseshit, but at the end of the day, the right guy won, and the trilogy is put to bed. So
Unfortunately, the scorecards weren't the only thing that was horseshit. The fight was too.
right, but I think, in my opinion, the scorecards overshadowed how bad the fight really was.
I
Because
think it goes hand in hand.
I would agree. Mm-hmm.
All right. So moving on from the boxing world over to mixed martial arts, UFC Vegas 60 took place on Saturday as well, prior to Canelo Triple G starting, and Corey Sandhagen, star of the show. I would call this UFC Vegas 60 gruesome fest. I mean, or UFC Vegas 60 cut fest, because I mean, in terms of action, we've seen better cards, but in terms of just the damage that was laid on fighters, I mean, good God, that cut on RoboCop and that cut on Song Yadong, back-to-back fights, main event and co-main event, were just utterly brutal and utterly disgusting looking. And I'm
Yeah.
surprised. Song Yadong got as long of a leash as he did.
Agreed. So I'm going to ask you a more general question before breaking down this fight, because I've watched MMA since 2006, and I've seen some nasty cuts over the years. A few that come to mind are Joe Stevenson's face after his loss to BJ Penn, Diego Sanchez's face after getting kicked in the head by BJ Penn. There's been several other ones. Carlos Condit's face during his fight with George St. Pierre. Where do these two back-to-back cuts rank for you in terms of the nastiest cuts that you've ever seen? Because the Yadong cut was stomach turning to watch.
Yeah, the Song Yadong cut, I would have to say, would definitely one of the worst of this year. I would say
Oh,
probably.
I think you can make the argument that Rodriguez and Yadong are 1A and 1B for
Yeah,
for
yeah.
two
You
of
know what?
the
Yeah,
entire year.
I think for the entire year they had a couple. They had a couple of the worst cuts. I would even say maybe of the last 5 years had one of the worst and deepest cuts. I mean, that thing on RoboCop. I mean, credit has to be given to the doctor of the athletic commission, who basically told Rodriguez, "I'm not going to give you much time," and Rodriguez, in that short time, managed to turn on the Jets and defeat GD Ninjukani. And to give credit to Song Yadong, he tried all his best, but Sandhagen, I think, just had a great strategy. Sandhagen kept distance. Sandhagen worked over his jab, focused on the face. He did the damage, and then Sandhagen just continued to work it over. I know Sandhagen's takedown attempts were all for naught, but Sandhagen was the busier fighter. Sandhagen was a more active fighter, throwing the better punches and landing where they needed to land to keep on worsening the cut, to the point where right before the fifth round, the doctor said, "I'm not liking what I'm seeing here," and Herb Dean decided to wave it off.
Yeah, and he got the much needed win that we were alluding to a week ago. That it looked like he was kind of going on a bit of a downturn. This is the win that he needed to stay in the bantamweight title picture, and that's exactly what he did. So, I mean, you have to give credit to both men. They fought extremely well. It was a very action-packed fight. You just got to feel for Yadong, considering that if he would have won this fight, this would have been his coming out party, and people would have talked about him as, being a guy to contend for a championship in 23. I'm not saying he can't now; he certainly can, but now he's going to have a bit of a longer road back. I wanted to get your opinion also on I want to get your opinion on Joe Piper's official UFC debut. And kind of curious. A lot of people were talking online that they thought that the fight was a mismatch. What were your initial thoughts on that as you were watching the fight?
Big time agree. Big time agree. That was a mismatch. Piper looked unbelievable in there. He got the highlight finish that he needed to have, and hashtag be Joe Piper. That literally, after all the hype that he got, after that ravaging speech from Dana White, where it was the "Do you want to be a fighter?" speech of the Dana White Contender Series, and it was be Joe Piper. And after a speech like that, and they were using it to hype the fight. They were using it, right before the fight. They were playing that clip over and over again, the Joe Piper clip. You would think you need to have a showing like Joe Piper did, where he scored a one-punch knockout of his opponent. But his opponent, you had to look at the record. He did not have a good record. He did not have the strongest kind of background. This was I think I even said it last week that this looked like a setup fight.
Yeah, that's exactly what it was. And, it looks like ever since Piper won in the Contender Series, his life has totally changed. I mean, now, according to that next level show that they do on the UFC's YouTube channel, like he now has a place to live and he's like getting recognized by fans. His life has totally changed ever since that win. And now this win in his debut, which was ultra impressive, is going to make him a lot more popular. And what's funny is that just the way in which he won was exactly how I thought that fight was going to go, and it just looks like the story is going to continue. It'll be interesting to see, though, not to take any credit away from him because he deserves all the credit in the world. It's going to be interesting to see how he'll compete against the top 15 in the next year and a half to see if he's really that guy, because he may be hyped up right now. He may be unofficially 2-0 in the UFC, 1-0 as an actual UFC fighter, but it's going to be interesting to see what he does as he keeps winning and moving up the rankings, because his story is just beginning.
For sure.
Another fight? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say, and again, got to give all the credit also in the world to RoboCop for, like I said, he didn't have much time to put Chidi away. He had a short leash. It looked like it wasn't going to take long, but it didn't take long. It didn't take long for him to pull off the victory.
Yeah, that fight was crazy in itself. It looked like RoboCop was going to lose at one point, and then once he got his second wind after they checked the cut, the fight was over. But that was a crazy fight in itself.
I should ask. Before we get on to any other fights,
okay.
Going back to Sandhagen. So I believe in his call out, he called out Chito Vera for a next fight. Do you think that's a sustainable match for him? Is that a good fight for him?
Oh yeah, I think he's ready for it. If he's fought Dillashaw, Sterling, and Jan, out of 3 out of his last 4 fights, there's no reason why he's not ready for a guy like Vera, who's already beat Sean O'Malley, who's fighting Peter Yan. So as you can tell, MMA math kind of doesn't really make a whole lot of sense here. But in this case, yes, I do think that Sandhagen is ready for Vera, and that could easily be a headliner on a fight night, 5 rounds, either at the Apex or when they start to open up again in 23. Do that at like a bigger arena in a smaller market that the UFC's been waiting to come to. You can easily sign me up for that. Absolutely.
Good. As far as other fights that got my eye, I got to give all the credit in the world to Andre Fili. Controversial split decision, but he got the job done, and hopefully for his sake, his UFC tenure is now saved. Fluffy Hernandez, great choke of Marc-Andre Barrios to kick off the main card. And Damon Jackson, I think Damon Jackson had the most telling story. That honestly, if I had known about his story before we did our little best bets thing last week, I would not have done anything with Sabatini. Damon Jackson, I believe, losing his brother very recently, but opting
Yeah.
to continue on. And let's face it, honestly, having one of, if not the performance of his career thus far, needing just 69 seconds to finish a hyped up and comer like Pat Sabatini.
Oh, for sure. I mean, that fight was unexpected to say the least. If you would have told me a couple days ago that he would have won that fight in over a minute, I would have said you are crazy. But that's what happens. That's the sport, and that's all the motivation he needed. And he's gonna definitely keep fighting for him in the back of his head. And every fight from here on out for Damon Jackson is gonna be huge. So he got the momentum he needed. He won the fight. And yeah, I think, truly it was one of those underrated cards, but I do think it was a good night for prospects overall. And it wasn't the greatest card ever, but I think what we expected to see pretty much happened. Oh, also another interesting sight. Joe Rogan was in the front row. I don't know if you caught this. He was
Yeah,
in
I
the front,
did.
He was in the front row at the Apex, and he was also at the T-Mobile Arena watching boxing. It's rare that you see Joe Rogan as a fan these days. What did you think of that sighting? I was not expecting that whatsoever, and I was like, oh, this is an interesting addition to the broadcast. I was not expecting that.
Yeah, no, I wasn't expecting that. I honestly was of the thought that we would not see Joe Rogan on any UFC broadcasts until it's time for him to call a pay-per-view here in America or in Canada. Actually, I don't even
Mhm.
know if he goes to Canada anymore.
I don't think he does. Yeah, I think it's literally just United States shows, but he's so into the Islam Makachev Oliveira fight that he may make a surprise appearance, but I doubt it. He only does really domestic shows. So the next one we would see him on is probably the Madison Square Garden card.
Yeah, for sure. If he does show up, I wouldn't be surprised. If he does show up to Abu Dhabi, I wouldn't be. No, I honestly would be surprised if it was a fight that took place, even just in Canada. I probably wouldn't have been surprised if he made the exception. But for him to fly across the world, I don't know if he's going to be so willing to do that. Obviously, there's going to be no UFC in this coming week. I think kind of a good reset point. Give us a bit of a break.
Yeah, in fact, there's two reset points over the next 4 weeks. Isn't there one off weekend in October? I thought
I want to say it's either October 8th or October 15th.
that's what I thought as well. And I think I don't know if this is just a coincidence, but I think the UFC needs to do this more often. Like I would be okay with seeing them, go 4 weekends in a row and taking 2 weeks of just to get a little
Oc-
bit more consistency. But
October
yeah,
8th, by the way. October 8th is an off week.
okay,
So actually, that means they'd have a card. They won't have a card this weekend.
no, they won't.
Uh, they won't have a card this weekend. They'll have a card next weekend, and then they won't have another card the weekend after.
Mm-hmm. And
So
then they go the 15th all the way through November and December, and then they're done. So I think they go like 8 or 9 weeks in a row after that.
So we are approaching the final stretch of the UFC for the 2022 schedule.
Which so far, through what are we in mid September?
Yep.
I'd give the overall year a B plus, and I guess we can plug this to we in case you guys are curious. We will have an end of year award show, or we will break on everything from the knockout of the year, the submission of the year, the fight of the year. I mean, it's going to be so we're going to make sure to make that a priority. But yeah, we are approaching the back half of the UFC schedule, if you will.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's turn our attention away. I mean, our attention's still on the octagon, but it's outside of the octagon. we do have to give a thanks. And if there was not a major boxing match, and if it had not been for the likes of Merab Dvalishvili going on to the MMA Hour and kind of hinting at this, this might be the number one story of the week. But it's been a little while, so it didn't get as much momentum on the side. Jose Aldo, the featherweight GOAT, the longest reigning featherweight champion in the history of the WEC and the UFC, the Zuffa days, is hanging it up. In a report from Combate, Jose Aldo appears to be retiring from the octagon. There was speculation that maybe he would have fought out his contract because he did have one more fight on his UFC deal, that he would have fought it out in Rio when the UFC starts up its 2023 schedule in January. However, according to Combate down in Brazil, he has entered into an agreement with the UFC to have his release so he may retire from mixed martial arts. Now, that does not mean he can't compete in other sports. There is a chance we could see Jose Aldo in his long-awaited boxing run. He has hinted for a couple of years now that once his MMA career was done, he was going to hop over to boxing. We could see him in a jiu-jitsu tournament. We could see him in a Muay Thai environment. But it appears that as far as MMA is concerned, the featherweight GOAT is done. He is hanging it up. So Zain, if this is truly the end, what are your thoughts? What can we say for the history of Jose Aldo?
Yeah, well, I'm just gonna put it to you straight. Jose Aldo was the fighter that introduced me to what the WEC was. The first WEC fight I ever saw was his win over Mike Brown, and that's what kind of kickstarted me learning that there's more MMA organizations than just the just the UFC. So that sparked my interest in the WEC, Strike Force at the time, et cetera, et cetera. And Aldo was the guy that kickstarted, and he was the one, probably like you too, Tom, who helped introduce me to what the lighter weight classes were, and he was truly a pioneer of that. When I look back on his career, I think back to the fights against Uriah Faber, the absolute dominant performances. I think back to his win in Rio against Chad Mendez when everybody went crazy and people picked him up off his shoulders after he won. I look back at his fights with Kenny Florian, his fight with Mark Hominick that was so impressive. He's had so many legendary fights over the course of over a decade-long career, and his run where he went, 10 years undefeated was nothing short of amazing. I would have liked to have seen him rematch Connor at some point because of how big that first fight was, but truly he's a legend of the sport. Every time it looked like his career was over, he'd come back and win a couple in a row and maintain his status in title contention. I mean, he is truly a Brazilian icon, one of the best Brazilian male MMA fighters to ever do it, and was truly a pioneer of the 145-pound division. And he'll be sorely missed. He was really never in a boring fight. He always brought the action, win or lose. Very high paced, action packed fighter. Has tons of highlights to look back on, and truly fought some of the best of his era, and did his thing for several years. It would have been nice to see his featherweight reign go a little bit longer. I think it would have changed the course of MMA history had it done so. But overall, a great career. A Brazilian pioneer of mixed martial arts, and a guy who went out the right way, went out on his own terms, was beloved by everybody in the MMA community, and he'll be sorely missed for sure.
So I kind of like the point that you made about him just never saying die. So he gets knocked out by Conor McGregor, comes back and becomes the featherweight champion again. He loses twice to Max Holloway, picks up a pair of wins. He loses to Volkanovski, says, okay, screw this, I'm going to go down to bantamweight. He controversially lost his first fight to Marias, lost to Peter Yan. It's looking okay. There's danger here, looking not good. and then he racks up 3 wins in a row before his loss to Merab Dvalishvili. So every time it seemed like Aldo was done, he always found a way to keep going. And as you mentioned, the Mark Hominick fight was unbelievable, really helped place him on the map. I agree with you that, like you, he and Dominic Cruz were the two. Dominic Cruz, and Mighty Mouse Johnson were the ones who introduced me to the lighter weight classes, the sub 155 weight classes. Once they were brought over from the WEC over into the UFC, Aldo's victory over Chad Mendez, absolutely legendary, as you alluded to. Also, as you alluded to, all the people in his home country lifting him on their shoulders. I also think back, coincidentally enough, to Aldo's first fight after losing the rematch to Max Holloway. I think it was in 2018 or 2019, where he was fighting Renato Moicano, got the finish and ran into the crowd for a big celebration.
Yeah, that was a special moment, and we haven't really done something like this on the show before, so I'm just gonna throw it out. I really do like playing this sort of game, if you will. So we're gonna take a time machine and we're gonna go back to 2012. I want to know who would have won a super fight to unify the belts for all the marbles. Who would have won, Dominic Cruz or Jose Aldo? Oh, a featherweight bantamweight crossover fight with both of them as champion. Who would have won?
I probably would lean Aldo.
I would too. Do you think it would have been probably at the time the biggest UFC unification fight in the history of the sport?
I think so. I just say Aldo because I think he would have brought more pressure. I think he was very key with his striking, and I think he just has the overall little better grappling skills than Cruz can offer.
For sure, and I think Aldo is more prone to finishing fights than Cruz, so I definitely would agree with that. Another legend of the sport, we're riding off into the sunset. I'm excited to see what else he does with his combat career, but again, I truly think he went out the right way, and I could tell the UFC did have a lot of respect for him, and they really did enjoy whenever he fought. So
then I'll go one step further. I think he could be, at least in the minds of us medium people and fans, up there. Like he has a legitimate argument for potentially the greatest the greatest Brazilian MMA fighter ever. Up there with Anderson Silva, up there with Vanderlei.
For sure. I don't even think it's debated. He's either one or two, but nothing else remotely below that. If you know the sport, he's easily top two.
I think
that country.
I think thinking about it, he might have an edge over Anderson, considering after Anderson lost to Chris Weidman, his career was not the same. He didn't have the kind of bounce backs that Jose Aldo did. I mean, he's bouncing back now in boxing, but that's boxing, not MMA.
That's a very good point. Anderson did not have the resurgence that Aldo had after losing his title.
And Aldo never failed the drug test. Silva's failed too.
That's very true. Yeah, you could easily make the argument that he's number one. Absolutely. But yeah, he's definitely a Brazilian pioneer that can't go on a Brazilian. You can't have a Brazilian MMA Mount Rushmore, if you will, without including Jose Aldo on that.
Not at all.
You can't. But yeah, absolutely legendary career. It'll be very exciting to see what he does next, for sure.
Yeah, hats off to Jose Aldo, featherweight goat. All right, so again, we don't have any UFC event coming up this weekend, but you know what we do have, Zan? We do have the return of Bellator MMA. Bellator will be hosting an event this coming weekend. It's special broadcasting because it's going to be taking place over in Ireland. So I believe here in America, The prelims will begin at 12:30 Eastern, 9:30 a.m. Pacific time, with the main card kicking off at 4 p.m. Eastern and 1 p.m. Pacific time. Our main event of Bellator 285 will see Benson Henderson, the former UFC lightweight champion and the former Bellator title challenger, taking on Peter Queally, who will have the home country advantage.
Yeah, to put it simply, this is Peter Quealy's biggest fight. Ben Henderson is the biggest name he's ever fought. As you said, former champion. I really don't see how Queally loses at home. I've been critical of Henderson over the years. I really think that you could argue that he, in my opinion, and I don't mean to bash him whatsoever, but in my personal opinion, Ben Henderson was one of the worst UFC champions ever, and
Ooh.
and the reason why I say that is because the majority of his run was controversial. More specifically, the Frankie Edgar fights. A lot of people felt that Ben Henderson didn't do enough, especially in fight number one and number two. You could make the argument that he lost both of those, and I just really think he hasn't been the same ever since going to Bellator. As you can see here, he's lost 3 out of his last 5, and the competition that he's fought just hasn't really been the same. This is a fight that Peter Queally should win, and there's no reason why he should lose, just given everything that's being put in front of him. To where it's almost like there's no way he shouldn't win this fight, in my opinion. I mean, if you look at Ben Henderson's losses, I mean, you lose to Brett Freeman, who was one of those prospects that everybody's super high on. You lose to
Who only
Jason.
became who only became Primus, who only became a Bellator champion because Michael Chandler broke his leg at the Garden.
Yeah, absolutely. You lose to Jason Jackson, who has a solid record, but really hasn't had like a huge signature win yet. I guess if you want to call Ben Henderson that, you can. I mean, you have to go all the way back to September of 2019. I mean, his career has really taken a downturn, over the last 4 to 5 years, and I just don't think things are going to change anytime soon. I mean, he's just his career has totally fallen off from what it could have become, and he could be one of the greatest lightweights ever, but he just simply isn't. And I've been off the Ben Henderson train for at least 7 years. Those Frankie Edgar fights to this day still piss me off because I really don't think he won either of them, and I think his career has kind of cost him after those, because then eventually he got exposed. I mean, if you look at Peter Queally's run, I mean, and he's beat Ricky Pitbull, he's fought him twice, and obviously the first one was super controversial, but you'd probably agree with me, he was winning that fight until the doctor stoppage happened.
Hey, look at Sanhagen for song. I know Sanhagen was winning the fight, but a doctor stoppage is a finish. That it is a finish in MMA. It will go in the record books.
That
He
is
finished with
no,
Ricky Pitbull.
no, that is true. He did, and I just really think this is the fight for Queally that I think is going to put him in the good graces of a lot of fans, and I really do think he can win this fight, and I think he can win it ultra impressive. Yeah, I think he wins it inside 3 rounds, and I think he does it pretty convincingly against a former champion who I think is on the downside of his career and just isn't the same fighter that he once was. I mean, he's going on 40 years old. He's not the same Ben Henderson that he was 10 years ago, and I just really think this is Queally's fight to lose, and I think he's going to win impressively. I really do.
So I'm going to agree with you, but I'm going to go in a different sense that for Queally, he needs to win. Henderson, I think, needs to win as well. I think this is a must win for both fighters, but for the different reasons. Benson Henderson, I kind of agree with you, has lost a step. I probably am not as harsh on Henderson as you are, but the fact of the remains that he has been on a massive losing skid up until recently in 2022. But like the ever since we've had the Bellator events during the pandemic, he just has not been able to get anything done. And Henderson is also uh, when he first got to Bellator, things weren't great for him either because he was always fighting for a championship. But the old expression, always the bridesmaid, never the bride. He was never able to defeat anybody at lightweight or featherweight for their gold. And so Henderson has become, he's become kind of a gatekeeper in
Yeah,
Bellator. He has
yeah, I
become
would,
he's become the guy that you step on, which is why I think Queally needs to win this fight because Henderson, he is a former champion still. He still has fought the better competition in Bellator. For Queally to lose to Benson Henderson in his own home country would be a
detrimental. Detrimental.
detrimental. Yeah, that would be a major step back. And, this is a big opportunity because Queally, Irish born, fights out of SBG Ireland, trains under John Kavanagh. This is a big opportunity for him in Bellator to make a new star, which can be done.
And
Now,
this is a big fight, not just for Queally, but for Kavanaugh himself, considering how much criticism he's gotten with the way that he's managed McGregor's career more specifically. A lot of people have been very critical of Kavanaugh over the past several years. So in order to not make the same mistakes with Queally, this is not only a must win for Queally, but this is a must win for the entire team over there. So
for sure. Um, I don't know if I think a finish is possible, but I think I would take the safer bet of. I agree with you that Queally will win. I would go more of a decision rather than a finish.
yeah, I could see that, but I do agree with you that Queeby will win and he'll look as if this co-main event though, as you alluded to earlier, this
This
co
is what I'm looking for.
I mean, yeah, this co-main event is awesome. I mean, you have Melvin Manhoff, one of the scariest kickboxers of all time, taking on an all action Yoel Romero, who's been in there with some legends over the course of his MMA career. Not to mention his fights with Robert Whitaker that were just absolutely insane. And I was lucky enough to be at UFC 225 when he fought Robert Whitaker in that insane 5 round war that had the United Center just going absolutely bonkers. But I mean, if you look at Romero's run, I mean, he's lost 4 out of his last 5. But if you look at those 4 losses, none of them are really horrible losses. I mean, he's fought the who's who of the middleweight division. I mean, you could even look right there. He's fought the current champion in Israel Adesanya. He's fought Phil Davis, who's a UFC veteran. He's fought Paulo Costa. He even grappled
Chris
Chris
Barnett.
Barnett, which is even more impressive because Barnett's making his own mini run in the UFC right now. He's fought a who's who list, and Manhoff is another one of those guys. I can say with confidence that this fight is not going the distance whatsoever.
No, I mean, with a couple of hard hitters like them, it's probably not going to. Uh, I mean, the Costa fight, I thought Costa won. Israel Adesanya fight, that fight was not exactly exciting, though. That was one of the bigger disappointments of 2020. Davis was a close split decision loss. Actually, these two, I think, were supposed to face off earlier this year in May here with the Alex Polizzi fight, but Manhoof needed the fight needed to be postponed because
That's right.
Manhoof got injured while trying to basically be a hero and stop criminals. So credit to him. As for Romero, he actually got a literal last second finish of Polizzi, 4:59 in the third.
Yeah, that was an insane fight. And if you were a better sweating a Romero by finish ticket, oh my goodness. but
You never want those sweats. You never want
yeah,
those kinds of
yeah,
sweats.
you don't want those at all. But I think Tom and I on this show can say with confidence that these two are going to go in there and start blasting each other. And I'm excited. I'm excited to see it. But if
I
I
would
were
not expect anything less for a Yoel Romero or a Melvin Manhoof.
if I were to pick a winner, I would say Manhoff wins. But either way, somebody's getting viciously finished. And if you have not seen Melvin Manhoff's highlights on YouTube, it's literally the craziest 5-minute highlight video you will ever see. It's just absolute obliteration of fighters from all different promotions, probably dating back to around 1997, which will make a lot of people feel really old. But he's just a nasty individual who likes to go in there and mix it up, and is one of the most exciting fighters to have never stepped foot in the UFC, which is a real damn shame. But yeah, yeah.
You say all the way back in 1997. I was born in late 1994, so you already made me feel old.
Yeah, and I was born about 4 years after you, so I guess that makes us feel both old. But it also goes to show that his career has been quite long too. So yeah,
For sure.
either way, this fight is not going the distance.
No,
So,
they are going to come out firing. Only thing that scares me about Manhoof when it comes to picking a winner makes me lean towards Yoel Romero. Manhoof hasn't fought in an MMA fight at least in 2 years. We haven't seen him since the loss to, I think it was Corey Anderson that he lost to, and Anderson's a rival.
yeah, that's a little easy to think about. That just 2 years ago, Corey Anderson was knocking out the eventual UFC light heavyweight champion, and sure enough, he goes over to Bellator. That's just kind of weird to think about.
Yeah, for certain. Any other bouts that you kind of have your eye on when it comes to best bets or just a fight that's going to be entertaining?
Yeah, I'd say the Mads Burrell fight, it's a good fight. Brett Johns is always exciting. If you're a hardcore MMA fan, there are a couple of fighters that you've definitely heard of if you've been around the sport as long as we have, I guess you could say.
I mean, Georgi Karakian
Yeah.
was fighting in the Bellator. Wasn't he fighting in the Bellator Featherweight Grand Prix not long ago?
Mm-hmm. And
now he's only on the prelims.
I think that just goes to show how they organize the card. But then again, when it comes to Bellator, sometimes their bout orders really don't make any sense. But yeah, overall, this card's decent. It's really not for the casual. And in my opinion, those top two fights should be good though. But yeah, if you're looking for some MMA to watch this weekend, this is the card that's on the calendar. It's going to be interesting the next few weeks just because there isn't a ton of UFC to talk about. But that'll basically wrap the show with a few really big stories this week, and we'll look forward to seeing what else is on the horizon or what other crazy news breaks as we move closer into the month of October.
For sure. Once again, thank you all for this edition of MMA Outsiders, episode number 7. I believe we are probably going to be on Tuesday mornings from now on. Pending some final things, it looks like that will be our schedule. So thank you for adjusting your time and keeping us in your lives despite a switch in days. Once again, make sure to follow us across social media at MMA Outsiders ETB. Make sure to follow the network at ETB Network. So that way you get all updates on MMA Outsiders and all the rest of programming. Make sure that you hit that like button. Make sure you hit subscribe. Ring the bell on the subscription. Get all the notifications for everything on the network from us, Enter the Bench Game On, and more. And make sure you follow us across social media on our personal social medias, Thomas J. Albano and Tom Talk Sports 9 and Sam Bando 99. And make sure to follow my work at Fansided MMA, and you can find Sam's work at bjpen.com. So that is going to do it for this edition of the MMA Outsiders. That's Sam Bando. I'm Tom Albano. We'll see you next week. And remember, be Joe Pfeiffer.